Welcome to Coach's Corner. For those of you that are new here, and I imagine there's quite a few of you with today's guest, COACH is an acronym that stands for the Conduit of Optimism, Altruism, Consciousness, and Health. And it's with those things in mind that I like to bring a guest that can come on and share a whole bunch of that information with us. And for those of you, again, that are new here, you may notice that I haven't shot an episode outside of last month in quite a while. December of 22 was my last episode prior to that. So took a little bit of time off and started to get to a point where I lived some life again. I got some life experience and learned some things, as I like to say, semantically, that I then needed to experience before coming back on and bringing it to you all. And with that as well, back in June, I got some information that I got a diagnosis of a tumor on my left kidney. And this is my first official announcement kind of to the world. Many of my close family and friends know this already. But with that in mind, I'm bringing some guests on that'll give us a whole different level of information to really take into control, if you will, your health and wellness, which is what I'm doing. And I'll share some details on that as we go. But without further ado, today's guest is Dr. Alexis Cowan, also known as Dr. Alexis Jasmine on Instagram. Dr. Alexis, I can't say how grateful I am to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat with you. I didn't know that about the tumor. There's a lot we can talk about, especially on that topic as it relates to mitochondrial function. I'm sure we'll get into it. But for now, I'm just really excited to be here and have this chat with you.
Amen. Amen. Likewise. Yeah. And it's one of those things, following you for quite a while now. I was introduced to you through Dr. Gabrielle Lyons' podcast. I came across you and it jumped off the screen at me that you mentioned Dr. Cruz. I said, of course. And that's, it's one of those quantum entanglement feelings that I had instantly that I said, I have to meet this person and have them on my podcast. And you are just a wealth of knowledge. So to share that with the audience, and I'm sure there's plenty that I will continue to learn from you. So with that being said, I'll do a quick little intro from what I've gathered about you and then let you kind of fill in some of the holes as we go. So Dr. Cowan is a high-performance health consultant, the author of The Lux Living, which is incredible. I'd love to have a hard copy of that if we can get it to that point, but currently just online from what I gather, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So what a phenomenal book. It is the Health Optimization Handbook. And Dr. Cowan received her PhD in molecular biology from Princeton out of the Rabinowitz lab. Just incredible. The information that I keep coming across when I look into your information just blows me away. And your ability to kind of pivot, to go through, get your PhD from Princeton and metabolism and understanding the body because of your backstory, which I'll get into in just a moment, but then to come across Dr. Jack Krus's work and instantly pivot everything you learn and say, wait a minute, this is incomplete. And you've gone even deeper. I'm just, as you can tell, I geek out about all of this and it really gets me excited. But as we know, so as a child, you were frequently sick, a lot of different bouts of antibiotics, which ultimately was likely the cause that led you to gain some weight and just move you down this path that sadly isn't all that uncommon. We know quite a few people who I think can relate to this story. And I think you are leading the way in what I refer to as this shift. We're going from this disempowerment paradigm into this empowerment paradigm. And you did it for yourself and you're now sharing it with everybody else. So I think that's where I'll leave it for the moment. Outside of, I guess I'll add in what I've picked up with you as well, and I can relate to, correct me if you disagree, but you strike me as a questioner by nature, somebody who just, as you come across information, you don't just accept it, you push back on it, and you make sure it's legit before you move forward with it. So that's the gist of what I've gotten from you. Please fill in any holes there and go into a little further detail about your backstory.
Yeah, so I would definitely say I've always been a very curious person. Actually, funny story, I was in culinary school after high school and I ended up having a pretty powerful, my first ever psychedelic experience that ended up resulting in me pivoting into science, which is kind of funny. And I feel like that was just an example of kind of how I've always been in life, just really curious and looking to understand reality, my body, other people better. And so I feel like science was kind of a natural progression to go into, although I will say at the time in undergrad when I like transferred and went into biochemistry and math, and then when I went to Princeton to study molecular biology, actually metabolism, but within the mold bio department, I never had anything in mind about what I was going to do with it. I was kind of always just following what seemed interesting and what kind of resonated with me, let's say, which is very unlike most people who go into academia, I would say, because most people, they go into academia with the notion that they're going to go into either pharma, biotech, or become a professor themselves and have their own lab. But none of that ever really resonated with me. I never really exactly knew what I was going to do with all of this, but the path kind of revealed itself as I went along. So that's been really fun and encouraging. And I like to share that with people. I'm actually giving a talk at a high school this Friday talking about light biology and like the importance of sunlight and nature and health and its absence in disease, but also in like non-canonical science careers, because I feel like a lot of kids, they don't really know, what the point of doing science could be outside of it just being interesting. And a lot of people don't necessarily want to go and have their own lab or work in pharma and things like this. So there is so many other options. It's like we're in an era now where we really can pave our own path if we have the drive to do so. And I think that's one of the really beautiful aspects of the information age and our connectivity on the digital sphere. But at the same time, I also really emphasize creating flesh and blood bonds and building actual physical community too, and the importance of that when it comes to not only our health, but also the health of our communities and being able to support people in real life. Because at the end of the day, those real life bonds are what actually are like physically being forged. I mean, we can forge connections across the earth in different ways in the digital sphere, but if shit hits the fan, we actually need those connections in real life to deal with circumstances that may arise. And so I'm really adamant on that too. And was another reason why I'm very much supportive of like Bobby Kennedy's work, because he talks about how the lack of home ownership among, like, let's say the millennial generation, everybody's renting because we can't afford to buy homes, and how that's leading to the breakdown of communities. Because if you don't purchase your home, you aren't really invested in building a community that's like vital and healthy and enjoyable to live in, because you don't know even how long you're going to be in that community. And I do really see that as like a canary in the coal mine of a lot of other systemic issues that we're facing as a generation, and that we're kind of stepping up to the plate and figuring out solutions about how to deal with this. And I personally believe that focusing on building your own vitality and health is the first and foremost thing that we need to do in order to positively impact the world. Because if we're operating from a place of depletion and burnout, we're not going to be able to effectively support other people in dealing with those issues. We need to have the experience to do and move through that first. And then with that wisdom, we can then go on and impact other people and help to rebuild our health as a society.
That's absolutely beautiful. I couldn't agree more, and I'm definitely an advocate for Bobby as well. Make America healthy again resonates deep within me, and I don't generally get overly political, but we're at a time where it's really not much of an option. I'm
Yeah.
43 now. I'll be 44 in December, and it was really probably about the first 30 years of my life that I knew very little about politics. At that point, I couldn't even have told you the difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, which interestingly, at this point, it seems like what we thought we knew about it doesn't matter any longer anyway. We sure seem to have a little bit of a uniparty controlling things. But yeah, without us going too far down the political realm, I am absolutely with you there with Bobby for a multitude of reasons. And there's an element, I'm with you for sure. Using technology to connect the way that we are right now, I'm eternally grateful for. But there's for sure an element of human connection. And I think for me personally, what my journey has been about is discovering to my core who I am, and spending that time in some meditative states and just exploring, finding out what is it that matters to me instead of following the crowd, which many people do, and which admittedly I did for the first couple of decades of my life. I've since really put in some time to discover what matters to me. And I've pulled back a bit. I like to say I've unplugged from the norm, and I've discovered myself. And with that, it feels very much, not to get too woo woo, but it feels like the universe has conspired in sending people my way, that I've established closer bonds with people that I've just met recently than maybe with some people in the past. January 7th will be 2 years since I've had alcohol. That's one of the things that I've changed, that I'm not saying everybody needs to do it, but by doing that and sharing that with people, I've met more and more people that have done the same. And it's been in the name of health and wellness. So there's there's an aspect there for sure that I can get behind.
Yeah, I had a chat yesterday with Dr. Madhava Sethi on my podcast, and we were talking about how the differences essentially between physical flesh and blood community versus digital communities, and how with algorithms and just our kind of bias as humans, when we go onto the digital sphere, we automatically gravitate towards people who are like us. And so we can very easily get caught in like echo chambers and kind of become disillusioned with other people's with other beliefs, let's say, versus if you are forging connections and like connecting with people in real life in your community, like your neighbors, for example. So many people like never talk to their neighbors, which is kind of crazy. Like I go out of my way to try to be social here because I want to, I just want to feel like a sense of community within my little area. But when we do that, we're going to be encountering people from all different walks of life. They might have different opinions than us. And then by being challenged by those opinions and being able to think critically and be able to communicate with people who don't necessarily agree with us, that's also a huge benefit for our own personal growth. And so I think that's something that's often missing online, is just like this healthy debate and healthy skepticism and just kind of like pushing back versus getting stuck in echo chambers. So it's something that I think a decent amount about, because I always am somebody who's constantly questioning myself and pushing myself to say like, okay, where can I be better? What are my blind spots? What can I know that can solve these issues? How can I help people better? How can I help myself? And so I'm just constantly kind of on that path of learning. I'm literally learning something new every single day. If a day goes by that I'm not learning something, I feel like I might as well be dead, because I just have this immense thirst for understanding that's kind of unquenchable.
That's amazing. I'm right there with you. It's everything you're saying I can relate to in such a way that curiosity is really what it comes down to. I have a sense that my beliefs are my beliefs because of my experiences, and my experiences are going to be different than the next person. So when I find somebody that has a different opinion than I do, that doesn't mean one of us is right and one of us is wrong necessarily. It means, well, I'm curious, what experience did you have that led you to have that opinion? And I want to learn about that. And it might end up being that when we walk in our separate directions, maybe it's a scenario of agree to disagree, or just appreciate one another's opinions and life experiences, that in that, time frame, if you will, in your life, your experience was such that this was your reality. And we have to take that into consideration and really be able to listen to one another. But I think, to your point with the echo chambers, I think there's a lot of people that lack the curiosity, and they're more concerned with just fitting in. So they're going to say what is expected of them to fit in, as opposed to thinking for themselves, thinking critically, and sharing what they actually believe. And I think that's that line of delineation that, if we're being honest with ourselves and honest with one another, with that curiosity, that's where we can have some incredible conversations, and quite literally, without being overly hyperbolic, I think change the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And this actually ties perfectly into the whole light story as well, because if we think about our modern light environments compared to the ancestral light environments, ancestrally speaking, the primary source of light in our environments is the sun, which has very specific wavelengths in it that we were designed or evolved to receive. So just as a very brief breakdown, midday sun around this time of day is over 50% red and infrared light, about 25% blue light. And this time of year is probably less than 5% UV light. Summertime could be like up to 10%. And that is the spectrum that we evolved, our bodies are expecting to see, let's say. If we contrast that with the indoor modern light environment, all of our energy efficient LEDs and fluorescent bulbs are highly enriched in blue wavelength light and completely devoid in red and infrared light, because they're energy efficient. Another word for infrared light is heat. So in the tech world, we like to remove heat or infrared light from the equation because it makes the tech work better, and it's more energy efficient because that heat is not contributing to the visible light spectrum. And so it's kind of seen as like a waste product, so to speak. But what we're not realizing is actually that infrared light is an essential nutrient for human biology. When we think about human bioenergetics, the two most important groups of wavelengths of light are really the ultraviolet and the infrared. And we'll get into why that is. But suffice to say for now that we're missing that infrared from our light sources, from our device screens, and from our light bulbs. But on top of that, we also coat all of our window glass in with coatings that basically prevent that infrared light from penetrating through, and it reflects it off instead, because if you're air conditioning your inside environment, you essentially don't want that heat from the outside coming in, because it's going to rack up your energy bills or whatever. In addition to that, standard window glass blocks 100% of UVB light and about 30% of UVA light. So simply sitting inside behind glass without any lights on or device screens on, you're already concentrating blue light in effect because you're blocking that infrared, UVB, and some UVA as well. So if we think about that, this is completely creating this crisis within the body that's not only creating issues with mitochondrial function, like your shirt says, make mitochondria great again. One of the ways we do that is getting outside with our bare feet on the ground and our skin in the sun. We're not only doing that, but we're also really messing with our nervous system. So as it turns out, blue light, that artificial blue light from our light bulbs and device screens, hijacks our central nervous system. It burns out our dopamine systems, and it also pushes us into this low-grade sympathetic state. When we're in this sympathetic state, we're not only, more focused on survival moment to moment, we're not really seeing the big picture, because being in a sympathetic state actually shuts off your peripheral vision physically, like literally. It also shuts off your ability to access your higher mind and see your like peripheral vision metaphorically as well, or let's say within the mind. And so when you're in a state like that, you're actually not even able to really see other people's perspectives very well. It's really hard to kind of zoom out and see the bigger picture. And so this can directly lead to more tribalism, more dogmatism, people getting stuck in their ways, literally getting stuck. And I actually really interestingly listened to a podcast with Dr. Robert Gilbert on Aubrey Marcus's podcast. And he was talking about like the spiritual or esoteric significance of different colors of light and different like colors in general. And he was talking about blue light and how it can be used in esoteric practices to fix energy, to make it more static, to make it stay in place. And I just paused it there and I was like, wow, this is so interesting, because if we think about the fact that we're bathing ourselves in this artificial blue light all the time, it's literally creating stasis. It's making us stuck. And a nervous system perspective, physiologically as well, I personally believe that it has a lot of implications with regards to posture and biomechanics too, which I hope to study in my future light lab. And anyway, I just think the implications are vast. And a lot of what we're seeing societally and with the conflict that we're seeing between like polarized parties, I think a lot of it comes down to this modern light environment that we're all being bathed in and we're just completely ignorant of for the most part.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And it really starts to tap into some of what Dr. Jack talks about with, I don't necessarily know, certainly nearly as much as he does. And I don't want to presume to know the intent of people behind it. But if we think about the casinos and what they've done in there with the light and the dopamine hijacking and such, it sure feels like the same exact thing with technology and just being able to control people. And whether we're able to, point fingers and blame who did it and determine whether or not there was intent behind it, if we can at least just highlight the information, show that it is existing, and get people to wake up. Just share this information to empower people, as I alluded to before, to say, hey, maybe put the phone down, maybe go get in touch with nature, do it with other people, and be able to, quite literally touch the earth. Nature heals, and let's break this addiction to the blue light and to the tech devices that, while they're quite life changing with things like what we're doing right now, again, I'm definitely eternally grateful for it. But if we can break the addiction to it, we can really make some dramatic changes. And I love how you jumped right into the light dynamic. And what I'd love us to be able to do is pulling from your book, your health pyramid. It's so simple. It makes so much sense to me. And coming as somebody who's been in the health and wellness industry for a little over 20 years now, it's the top two, like most people I would imagine, that think health and wellness. It's movement or exercise and then nutrition, some degree of diet and exercise that people talk about all the time, but that's the peak of the pyramid. If we start down at the foundation and we take into consideration this dynamic between light and dark, and preferably speaking, natural light and then natural darkness, then our water and the magnetism. So that's our base. Then we move up to our sleep. Then we move up to nutrition, and then we move up to the movement. If we can use that pyramid and kind of give people, I've listened to you in so many different podcasts, and what I've taken from you is another thing we have in common is it seems you like to lower the barrier of entry for people. Just try to get them involved, get them to understand, and just get started somehow right now. So with that in mind, while down the road we can discuss a little bit more about how to leverage, as I love to steal this phrase from you too, bioharmonizing as opposed to biohacking, whether it's red light therapy, all those different things that we can do. If we start with the low end of the spectrum of what can we do to maximize on a daily basis the light dark cycle, the water element, and then magnetism, starting with the foundation, where would we go with that?
Yeah, so I mean, the best part about this is most of this stuff is free and everybody can have access to it in some fashion. Because although that base of that pyramid is light, dark, water, and magnetism, which are all the forces required for mitochondrial function, and for people who don't know, mitochondria are these units within cells, organelles, that are responsible for making the vast majority of energy and metabolic water within cells. The only adult cell type that doesn't have mitochondria is red blood cells. And we can talk about why that is later if you want to. Um, Spoiler alert, it relates to deuterium biology, which we can also get into if you'd like. But essentially, these foundational forces are required to create mitochondrial health and support their function. And because mitochondria are responsible for providing all of this energy and hydration at the tissue level that those tissues require to actually function properly, that should make complete sense why we need to prioritize that first. Because if we're just focused on diet and exercise, well, you need healthy mitochondria to metabolize nutrients. You need healthy mitochondria to move your body effectively. So we really need to take things down to this basic level, which will then allow us to build that foundation upon which we can, implement a healthy, whole foods based seasonal diet and high quality movement practice. And then that's a symphony of inputs that's going to actually create real health. And this is why Jack is so adamant about saying, like, if diet and exercise worked, we would all be really fit at this point, because those narratives have been pushed for decades. And we're just getting sicker and fatter. And it's because we're missing the elephant in the room, which is our mitochondrial function and our poor light environments. So when we think about light and dark, these are really important inputs from a circadian health perspective. So circadian health being the 24-hour cycles within the body. The primary input into the body that sets the master clock in the brain, called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN, is blue light. And so this should be another, like, it should remind you of the conversation we just had a moment ago, where I said, we're bathing in blue light all day long inside on our devices and with our lights on. And so it's one thing to do that during the day when the body's expecting to receive blue light. However, I will say, when you're receiving blue light from the sun, it's always with an abundance of red and infrared light. So the unnatural blue light that we're experiencing indoors, it's not something our body knows how to interpret, because as it turns out, actually, blue light in isolation inhibits mitochondrial function on your skin, eyes, and proximal brain regions. And our bodies are expecting to receive that blue light with that abundance of red and infrared light, because red and infrared light actually stimulates mitochondrial function, energy production, water production, and has a very balancing effect on the effects of that, like, shortwave visible blue light. So right off the bat, we have an issue with regards to the ratios of different types of light we're receiving indoors. But from a mitochondrial perspective and a circadian perspective, that blue light is interacting with the retina. The retina is directly connected to that master clock in the brain via something called the RHT, or the retinohypothalamic tract. And when the eye is interpreting or discovering blue light in the environment, a cascade goes off that directly tells that master clock in the brain, essentially, that it's the middle of the day. And that's why we're really supposed to be receiving our blue light from the sun. And then when the sun goes down at night, we're not meant to receive blue light at all. And that's why, something that people can do if they're going to inevitably encounter some form of unfiltered light, like whether they can't change light bulbs in their house to red bulbs, or they can't change their device screens to like amber or red mode, which I would argue like most people can do that. So we can talk about ways to do that. But if you can't do that, then you should just have a pair of blue blocking glasses on you at all times, 100% blue blockers that have a dark orange lens that you can pop on as needed, starting around sundown, to prevent that blue light signal from getting into that master clock in the brain, so that your body can start to shift into that nighttime mode. During the daytime, we run completely different programs than we do at night. So daytime is all about digestion, cognition, movement. Nighttime is really about rest, recovery, repair, regeneration, wound healing. The brain literally like flushes itself out. The CSF will flush itself out so that any sort of buildup from the day is getting cleared out, so that you can start fresh the next day. And everybody knows that if your sleep quality is poor, or you're sleep deprived for multiple nights in a row, like, everything starts to break down. I think even sleep depriving people, young men, for like 5 days, something like this, creates very severe insulin resistance, lots of mental health issues, severe metabolic health implications. And so we all have a sense that we need good quality sleep. But the part that people don't really necessarily understand is the impact of the light environment and light and dark cycles on that sleep quality. So blue light directly impairs melatonin release from the pineal gland. So during the day, the pineal gland is sensitizing serotonin. At nighttime, that serotonin can be converted into melatonin, which helps you fall asleep, stay asleep, and get good quality sleep. That melatonin can also enter the blood circulation where it bathes the tissues. It helps to set the peripheral clocks in all the other cells of the body. Every cell in the body essentially has its own clock that's being set by that master clock in the brain. So in order for everything to be on the same page, we need to block that blue light at night. It's going to allow melatonin to bathe the tissues. There's also other signals being sent to the rest of the body about it being nighttime and, engaging in regenerative processes, let's say. Melatonin is actually also something people may not know, is also made in like every mitochondria within the body, but it plays a completely different role there. So mitochondrial melatonin is responsible for quenching excess reactive species like reactive oxygen and nitrogen species, helps to maintain a healthy mitochondrial environment. It's not in exchange with the blood circulation. Blood melatonin is strictly from the pineal gland. And we also actually know, fun fact, that this is partially the reason why artificial light exposure at night is highly associated with breast cancer incidence. It appears to be at least in part due to this failure of melatonin secretion and not being able to bathe the cells. But I also think this is highly likely to be another canary in the coal mine where it's like melatonin is a biomarker for your dark exposure at night, essentially. But there's a whole host of other processes that are happening when it's dark out. So if you're just trying to supplement melatonin at night and you're not actually dealing with your light environment and making it dark, that's not going to cut it when it comes to creating health, especially because when melatonin is increased in your circulation, it actually sensitizes the photoreceptors or the light receptors in the retina. And so what that means is if you take a melatonin supplement and then you're sitting on your phone or watching TV, you're literally really harming those photoreceptors that are responsible not only for your vision, but also for that relay tract that goes to the brain that tells the brain what time of day it is, and then all the downstream processes that are affected by that. So I highly recommend people just really focus on dialing in their light environment, getting enough sunshine during the day. We need that bright light during the day to help us make more melatonin at nighttime. So getting that bright sunlight during the day, ideally seeing sunrise if you can, maximizing that midday sun exposure, and you can use vitamin D as a biomarker to make sure that you're getting enough of that midday sun exposure for your skin type, because the more melanin you have in your skin, essentially the more midday sun you need in order to optimize vitamin D status. There's also a whole other cascade that we can talk about from UVB light, which is what synthesizes vitamin D. This other cascade is what results in the synthesis of POMC or pro-opiomelanocortin, which we definitely need to get into. And that's all from midday sun. And then sunset is similar to sunrise. You're getting bathed in a whole bunch of red and infrared light. Essentially, 80% of that sunrise or sunset sun is red and infrared light. And then at nighttime, you're supposed to be in a dark environment. You're going to block blue light with the glasses, or you're going to, use red light bulbs and put filters on your screen so that you're not getting that blue light stimulus. And you're going to magically find that you're going to fall asleep earlier, get better quality sleep, and wake up earlier. That's something that I experienced right away. I always identified as a night owl all the way up through April of 2023 when I discovered Dr. Jack's work. And I immediately changed my lifestyle overnight, started blocking blue light at night and spending my days outside, and would just get sleepy around like 10 p.m. and fall asleep and wake up early. And I was like, who am I? Like, I never thought I would be this person, but turns out all people are that person if you're giving them the right environmental inputs. And so that was like my immediate buy-in. I noticed differences immediately in my sleep quality. I wasn't waking up at all in the middle of the night. I was sleeping like a rock. I was waking up feeling very rested and like excited and energetic for the day. And that was kind of the beginning. And I started then, implementing some other stuff like getting more grounding, my bare feet on the earth, changing all the light bulbs in the house so that I could make them red at night. And just spending more time outside, just like working on my computer outside in the patio instead of spending money on dubious supplements. I was now investing in making a nice outdoor space that I could enjoy spending time in, that's functional. And I just saw such dramatic changes in my quality of life that I then basically switched my entire practice to start teaching about these principles. And I, of course, had also dived into all this science when I discovered his work. And I was like, oh my gosh, like all of this is literally in the literature, just nobody's talking about it. And so that was kind of the beginning for me where I just jumped down the rabbit hole and I haven't come back since. And it's just not only very rewarding from a health perspective, but it's also extremely intellectually stimulating for me. It's very interesting science. And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that I'm really excited to address in my future lab.
That's incredible. It's so much of what you say. Every time I listen to you, I can really resonate with. There's a point at which, well before I actually was fully aware of the blue light element, I changed my schedule as well. I was very much a night owl, certainly through my 20s, and it was all about being social and partying and out, whether it was a club or a concert or a sporting event, and it always revolved around eating and drinking alcohol and things that are just destroying our biology. So it came as no surprise that I wasn't feeling as well as I could have or should have. And I just kind of I took it upon myself to say, okay, successful people that I know are getting to bed earlier, getting up earlier. And what I started to do that really changed my life was by getting up earlier to the point there were some days I was up at as early as 3:30, some days 4:30, and it was just consistent. I didn't use an alarm. I just let my body wake up when it would naturally wake up. I wouldn't even look at the time. If I felt rested, I would just get up and I would get down to my basement. I would get my workout in. I'd be absorbing information through some form of a podcast or a book through Audible. And it really felt, as silly as it sounds, like I figured my Neo approach from the Matrix. Like I felt like I was downloading information. I had time that I would normally have been asleep, that I was up and I was in more of that theta brainwave state and just absorbing that information. And it really took off. But I've changed that a little bit recently. The more I learn about this whole light cycle, if you will, that even in the morning before sunrise, if I'm up that much earlier than the sun and I'm turning on lights and I have the phone on, I've got all the blue light, that's messing me up on a whole nother end of the spectrum. So if I do get up that early, I don't fight it, but I'll put my blue light blocking glasses on then. And, whether it's before sunrise or after sunset, making sure I'm blocking the light. But yeah, I'm absolutely with you there in that regard. And it's completely changed my life. And, in many ways, I have a lot of clients that even back just in my training days 20 years ago, people telling me that for whatever the reason, I was unrelatable. And now there's an element of that too, because I'm willing, and I don't genuinely understand why it's unrelatable. I guess I do on some level, but all I'm doing is as I learn the information, I apply it. And when I see that it really serves me, it's a new habit and it's my way of life now. So I want to lead by example and encourage people to do the same. And I'll take a quick sidebar if we can. It makes me think I just kind of threw it out there at the beginning about my diagnosis, but it was amazing. The moment the doctor gave me my diagnosis, I felt this rush of energy from my feet all the way through my body up to my head, and it resulted in a big smile on my face. And I told him, I said, Doc, I'm not going to be like any of your other patients. I said, I don't have any intentions of going through any standard of care treatment. And that rush of energy I felt was just pure peace and calm. I had zero fear, zero worry or anxiety about it. And I trust in my body's innate ability to heal itself. But I also knew in that moment I had some more to learn. As much as I have changed and I know in many different ways through many different metrics, I am very healthy. I feel good. I sleep great. I have energy throughout the day that are, it's beyond that of people 20 years my junior, but there's something still going on that I feel a lot of it is from, if you will, a previous life of mine. In my youth, there were elements of insecurity, uncertainty. I was very sensitive and emotional, as I still am, but I never really learned how to work through that. So that would kind of, a level of sadness that I would feel in my body would end up creating an anger. And we know that every thought we have creates a chemical. That chemical changes the chemistry of our blood, which is the environment our cells live in. So I knew, and from that perspective, that the environment I was giving my cells to live in wasn't optimal back then. I didn't know that it was going to result in something this many years down the road, but I do believe that was the cause. So now that I'm aware of it, it's giving me that opportunity to give it my energy and give it the necessary stimulus to heal. So that's kind of where I'm at now, and taking this idea of the quantum biology of the light water magnetism, and yes, thinking about eating seasonally as well and working in the exercise component. But it's through that lens that I see this. And, as I talk to people about it, they view me as being a little different. And they say, well, if anyone can do it, it's you. But I say that I push back on that because I don't think I'm really unique in that regard. I think the human body is capable if we give it that opportunity and we get out of the way. So I guess that's kind of me throwing it all out there. That's my gut feeling about it all, and I guess I'll get your take on it. But I do want to bring us back to the health pyramid as well.
Wow, yeah, I have so many thoughts. And do you know what human design is?
No.
So it's something I've been studying very intensely for a few months now. It was a system that was actually channeled by this guy, like Robert Krakauer, back in like 1987, and it's really interesting. But anyway, he ended up going by the name Ra after that. And part of human design, so like it's basically the chakra system, but it's broken up a little bit differently. And the solar plexus, which is the emotional center, one of the tissues that it rules is the kidneys. So it's interesting that you mentioned about your
Hmm.
emotional state influencing the condition, like in your childhood, let's say, because I feel like that really is connecting some dots there. And also that gut feeling, that gut intuition you describe. Anyway, we can talk about it offline, but I would be really curious to see if you're an emotional generator. I'm also an emotional generator, in case you are, but we can talk about it offline. I think it's really powerful though. And talking about also like other lifetimes, for example, when we're thinking about mitochondrial health, our mitochondria are exquisitely responding to our environments like all the time.
Hmm.
And that could be either the mitochondria that we are cultivating through a lifetime. It can also be the mitochondria we're dealt as babies from our mom, because we receive all our mitochondria from mom. And this research was really pioneered by Dr. Doug Wallace out of Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. He's the one who discovered mitochondrial Eve, which is basically if you follow all the mitochondrial lineage back, you can get to like one woman,
Hmm.
which is pretty neat. And it's also, he's the one who described how all the mitochondria we get are from the egg that becomes us in utero. And so, depending on the quality of mom's life and also even your grandma's behaviors too, because when your mom was in your grandmother's womb, she already was developing the eggs and the egg that would become you. So, you're already being impacted by your grandmother's behaviors and lifestyle and environment. And so, this is also why I really like focusing on mitochondrial medicine, because on one hand, it's like, you're dealt a bad hand, like, what can I do about that? But you actually can do a lot about it, because when it comes to mitochondria, if we can balance processes called mitophagy and mitobiogenesis or mitochondrial biogenesis, then we can actually completely transform the hand that we've been dealt or the hand that we've cultivated throughout our lifetime up until now. So mitophagy is the process by which the damaged or dysfunctional mitochondria are preferentially broken down, and those parts can then be reused to make other structures and molecules. Mitobiogenesis is the process by which we can preferentially amplify the high quality mitochondria. And so when we're optimizing both of these pathways, you can see in effect what we're doing is we're purifying the mitochondrial colony, and then we're amplifying the healthy mitochondria. And so we can really turn our health around when we have a mitochondrial focus in our health optimization approach, let's say. And so when it comes to mitochondria, there's this concept called heteroplasmy, which is the rates of mutation within mitochondrial DNA. So to backtrack a little bit, there's this theory called the endosymbiont theory, which states that all mitochondria are essentially derived from bacteria in like the evolutionary lineage. At some point, a single-celled organism fused with a bacteria, and that bacteria became a mitochondria. They were better together, so to speak, and then, things took off from there. And so mitochondria and bacteria share a lot in common. They both have a double membrane system. They both have circular DNA. And so when we're looking at mitochondrial DNA, depending on the level of mutations within the DNA within mitochondria, is basically dictating how healthy your mitochondria are. Because within that mitochondrial DNA, there are 13 proteins that are encoded that are responsible for the electron transport chain, which is the pathway by which energy and water are made within mitochondria. So you can imagine that accumulating mutation in those 13 proteins is going to decrease the efficiency of energy production and water production, because you're now changing the way that those proteins are behaving and the way that they're shaped, etc. And so when it comes to heteroplasmy, the high heteroplasmy or high mutation burden mitochondria are the ones that, if we're optimizing for mitophagy, they basically will put their hand up and be like, take me out, like self-sacrificing themselves, because they are not functioning optimally. And mitophagy is really regulated by a couple things: red light and ketosis or fasting. And so this is also why it's important to live a more circadian lifestyle when it comes to eating as well. So, for example, eating a bigger breakfast early in the morning, like shortly after sunrise, and having your smallest meal of the day be at dinner time and have it a relatively low carb meal, a more keto-ish style meal, because then that allows you to get into a good fasting, fat burning state overnight. And by the time you get into your REM cycles later in the sleeping window, you're going to be, getting into like a low grade ketosis. Then you combine that with waking up and seeing the sunrise, that ketosis and the red and infrared light from the sun synergize to amplify mitophagy, amplify that process of breaking down damaged mitochondria. So that's on the one hand, we can selectively deplete those mitochondria that may be causing us issues. And then engaging in the mitobiogenesis, well, that side of things is really more so relating to UV light and also moving our bodies outside in natural light, ideally like, maybe early afternoon, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Then we're getting the grounding force. We're getting free electrons from the earth that help to power those mitochondria. We're getting structuring of the water. So we didn't talk about the water aspect of the foundation yet, but water really goes along with everything else. Like if you're optimizing your relationship to the sun and to nature in general, you're going to be working on all of these pillars, the light, the water, and the magnetism, all at the same time. You don't have to consciously do anything else other than get your bare feet on the earth, get your skin in the sun, and move your body like outside. Because that far infrared light, which is like around 3100 nanometers, which you get from the sun, is really potently able to structure the water within cells into this so-called fourth phase or exclusion zone water that was discovered by Dr. Gerald Pollack, I think about 15 years ago at this point. And this structured water is actually able to do work within cells. It's able to power metabolism. So oftentimes we think about ATP, chemical energy, being responsible for powering metabolism. But what ATP really does is it opens up, allows enzymes to open up so that that water can actually go into the enzyme and do the active work. So we need that structured water to actually be there in order to facilitate metabolism. We also know that structured water is really important from a thyroid hormone signaling standpoint. So if we're low in EZ water, we're not getting enough of that far infrared light, but also UV light too, which is important for the structuring process, that we're not going to have, even if you have normal T3, T4 levels, that your thyroid hormone signaling may be suboptimal. And so that could manifest as like elevated TSH relative to, maybe normal T4, T3 levels. All we really need to do is get our bodies outside into the sun and engage this natural process that's supposed to happen. Because if you think about the ancestral environment, we were living a very outdoor lifestyle. We were always connected to the earth. We didn't have any synthetic fabrics that were blocking us from being grounded, for example, because anything like cotton, leather, any natural material can facilitate that flow of charge into the body. Mm-hmm. Contrast that with like rubber soles and all of our synthetic fabrics that don't actually allow that force to be assimilated by the system. And so we're completely detached electrically from nature for the first time in the history of our species. We were always meant to be like, while we're sleeping, we're grounding. While we're walking around, we're grounding. It's like a constant force that we're receiving, and now it's being completely removed from the equation. And if we look at like the triad of human bioenergetics, we of course have food and nutrition as one of those pillars that's providing electrons and protons to our mitochondria to make energy and water. But we also have the grounding force, and we also have sunlight exposure onto the skin. So we didn't talk about this aspect yet, but when melanin interfaces with sunlight, it's able to split neighboring water molecules into free electrons, 4 free electrons, molecular hydrogen, and molecular oxygen. Molecular oxygen serves as a terminal electron acceptor in the electron transport chain, which is what allows water to be made and ATP to be made. The molecular hydrogen is also involved in the battery that is a mitochondria, but it's also a potent antioxidant. And then, of course, the free electrons can directly power mitochondria as well. So in bioenergetics, we're really meant to have all 3 inputs at one time to receive optimal mitochondrial function. And yet in the modern day life, we've completely removed 2 of those from the equation. We're only left with food. We're completely missing the grounding force from connecting with the earth with our bare feet and palms. We're completely missing that force of sunlight on our skin, because every time we go outside, we're told to cover up, slap the sunscreen, wear our sunglasses. We're wearing glasses or contacts. We're blocking that input into our system. And it's absolutely wreaking havoc from a mitochondrial perspective, from a neuroendocrine perspective. We also didn't talk about this yet, but I alluded to POMC earlier. POMC, or pro-opium melanocortin, is a product of UVB light stimulating our skin and our brain via the eyes. And that POMC molecule is cleaved into 10 distinct hormonal products, 3 of which are alpha, beta, and gamma MSH, or melanocyte-stimulating hormone. As the name implies, these 3 hormones are responsible for helping to stimulate melanocytes to make new melanin, which is what allows you to tan in response to the sun, but it also helps to support melanin within all parts of your body. So there's melanin deep inside your brain, the substantia nigra, the locus coeruleus. Loss of melanin in the substantia nigra is a hallmark of Parkinson's disease. We also have melanin sheets at all of our sensory layers, essentially, in the nasal mucosa, in the oral mucosa, in the inner ear, obviously in the skin as well. And so they serve really important roles there. Melanin is a very potent chelator of heavy metals. It also quenches reactive oxygen species. So it's really important buffer against inflammation and reactive environments. So we have the ability to leverage melanin for that, but then at the same time, the dermatology community will tell you there's no such thing as a healthy tan, which is absolute insanity when you learn about melanin biology and the ability to make free energy from sunlight through leveraging melanin in your skin, the ability to buffer yourself against toxic environments by cultivating that melanin. And melanocytes are derived from the same evolutionary or developmental origin as the brain cells, as the neurons. It's called neuroectoderm, which maintains its ability to basically be mobile within the body. And so your body can actually pull melanin from your skin internally if it needs it. And that's why actually having a tan is a great sign. It's really healthy to have a tan because you're going to be able to buffer your system against potentially toxic environments that we're inevitably going to be exposed to as modern humans. But in addition to that, alpha MSH also directly works on the hypothalamus to decrease appetite and increase energy expenditure, which is like the holy grail when it comes to healthy body composition and weight loss. Like that's basically what we're doing when we're leveraging something like Ozempic, which is shutting down the appetite and increasing basal metabolic rate. But the problem with Ozempic is that it's breaking the feedback loops that exist within the body, and we're now basically getting these dissonant signals within the system, and there's going to be trade-offs. Like nothing is a free lunch. We're, like Jack often talks about, we're probably going to see neuroendocrine tumors in the pancreas as a result of especially high dose use of drugs like this. And of course, some people who are morbidly obese may benefit tremendously from using these drugs. But for people who are just trying to lose like 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds, like this is not appropriate in my mind. I think people are constantly looking for shortcuts. Again, it also relates to our light environment and our inability to stay focused, our inability to just have an ability to see other options, other opportunities. We're kind of losing that faculty by constantly stimulating that sympathetic nervous system and getting ourselves locked into our tech and essentially addicted to it. So there's alpha MSH effects on metabolism. We also want to talk about alpha, beta, and gamma endorphin, which are 3 other cleavage products to POMC. Alpha, beta, and gamma endorphins are the natural endogenous opioid molecules that our bodies make, similar to like morphine, for example, or all the opioid drugs that people can gravitate towards if they're not feeling too happy about their lives. Our bodies are supposed to make them, and we're literally supposed to be addicted to the sun. That is why we make these opioids in response to UVB light in particular. These opioids, in addition to reducing anxiety, depression, pain, also help to improve learning, memory, and cognition, and help us to have a higher level of dopamine at a baseline. That higher dopamine baseline level allows us to think critically better. It allows us to operate more autonomously. When we become dopamine slaves to the next hit of dopamine from our screens, from our food, drugs and alcohol, pornography, whatever it is, that roller coaster ride of dopamine is because you're not operating like cruising at altitude, because you're missing that UVB light that is supposed to be allowing you to just have like this, high baseline level that allows you to be free of urges, let's say, or compulsions. And so people are totally missing that, and it makes complete sense why as a society we are having this opioid crisis. Like it just makes perfect sense when you learn about how these opioids are supposed to be produced basically, every day when you're outside in the sun. And it also connects, of course, to movement. We know that dopamine is really important for movement quality in the body. That's why Parkinson's patients have tremors. Their movement quality goes way down. Their dopamine system is basically being depleted. Melanin and dopamine share the same precursor, tyrosine. So your body can actually break down melanin to make dopamine. And that's essentially what's happening in Parkinson's within the substantia nigra. We're breaking down that melanin to make dopamine over time. That melanin gets degraded completely because we're not giving it the stimulus to replenish. And we also see very clearly in the data that individuals with low vitamin D status and poor sun exposure habits are more susceptible to Parkinson's disease, as well as especially like white males. And so it's very interesting, I think, to note that in the African American, Black, or just, dark skinned populations in general, Parkinson's disease is quite rare relative to what is observed among Caucasian individuals. And I think when we learn about quantum biology, it makes perfect sense, because if we can pull melanin from the outside in, we can now buffer ourselves against degrading melanin within the substantia nigra as well. So I think it's an interesting observation there scientifically. And yet we're told that UVB light is bad, that we need to block it with sunscreens and sunglasses and UV blocking glasses and contacts. And yet this stimulus is absolutely crucial to our eyes and our skin simultaneously in order to receive all of these benefits that I just alluded to.
Amazing. There's so much you just touched upon there. My mind was just firing everywhere you went off. But I'll go back to, you were talking about mitochondria coming from mom and the relationships from an emotional standpoint, mom and grandma. So I'll share with you that both of my parents have passed. My dad just passed back in March of this year, my mom in January of
Ugh.
22. And it's really interesting because what comes to mind with everything you just touched upon there, I recall back to something I saw recently that when you heal yourself, you also heal your ancestors as well as your children and everybody in your family moving forward. And this level of curiosity that you and I have in common, it's what's gotten me to this point and wanting to ask questions. My dad had Parkinson's. He worked on computers all day long. He worked on semiconductors. So he was indoors in an office staring at a computer screen, actually multiple computer screens all day every day for his entire career. And
Wow.
there's this element that went through my mind as well, that you're talking about how important the sunshine is with the opioids and such, and that we make endogenously. So many people when they go on vacation feel like, oh, this is what I needed, the sun, I feel so much better, and they think it's just because they got away from work and they had some time off and it was stress reduction. But it's so much more than that. It's because they gotten back in touch with nature and their body was able to heal itself in the sun. And there's just some, I mean, honestly, like everything you were saying, I was just feeling like light bulbs going off in my head, that us talking and me following you for as long as I have is absolutely playing a role with me healing myself in so many different ways. And as such, mom and dad are healing wherever they are, and depending on how we look at death, I no longer fear death, and I haven't for a long time. I've actually got oddly, a pretty good relationship with it. I've known a lot of loved ones, a lot of close friends that have passed, some, multitude of different reasons that they have passed, but I find that each of them, I feel energetically they're with me. So it drives me towards, it motivates me to do more of what I'm doing and become more and more authentic and stay on my path. And this premise of healing myself so that I can also heal them just really resonates deep in me. And so much of what you just touched upon highlights a lot of that. It's, I didn't expect us to go here.
You're making me cry.
It's powerful. This is deep. This is, Jack talks about decentralized medicine. This is so special to be able to have this. And I think I have a four set of principles that I kind of let guide me. It starts with authenticity, it's humility, it's vulnerability, and it's a willingness to be adaptable. So adaptability. And those four things are what I put myself through on a daily basis. I mean, admittedly, when I reached out to you and I invited you on, there was a part of me that felt like it was going to be a no. You're so busy. My channel is so small right now. But I felt like, you know what? What's the worst that happens? If she says no, she says no, and I'll continue to follow her and learn from her. But what if she says yes? And what can come from it? And here we are. And I'm just at that stage of life, and I really want people to take from this conversation this very same thing. Find it within you. Find that authenticity, that humility, that willingness to be vulnerable and adapt and just become the best version of yourself and do it on a daily basis. And there's something special that we can do. I know some of the things I share, they get a little woo woo, they can be a little hyperbolic, but I just truly believe it in my heart that conversations like this, if we can get this in front of many people and hopefully get them to do the same thing that we're doing, I think it can save the world. I mean, it gets us away from the disempowerment paradigm that I allude to is the degree to which big pharma wants you to take a pill for everything that ails you, when all we need to do is be outside, stop poisoning ourselves with the blue light, with everything indoors, all these non-native EMFs that we are just being inundated with. And so few of us even know what that type of stuff is. You allude to the exclusion zone water. Most people don't know what that is. If I talk that, I'm a massage therapist, that's my primary day to day. And I talk to people about how tense I feel that they are, that I want to teach them how to stimulate their parasympathetic and how I want to help them get their tissue to hydrate. They hear hydrate and they say, well, I drink enough water. So, well, that's an element of it, but what quality of the water are we talking about? And exclusion zone water isn't H2O. There's just so much here that, when I hear Jack get fired up and talk about decentralized medicine, his passion and what comes across to some people as this anger, I love everything about him, and I love that of him. And what I love of you is you have a similar message, but in a much softer package. And there's a reason for that. He's been around a long time, and he is angry at the system. He's angry with himself for not getting it all sooner and making these changes sooner. But when I listen to him talk to you, he sees something in you that I see it. I really do. You getting your lab, if things work out, I pray that his connection with you and Nicole Shanahan, hopefully that's how your lab gets taken off, and whatever role I can play with it, I want to do it, whether it's a satellite lab up here, or me coming to you, or just spreading the word, whatever it is. Something special is happening now, and I'm so grateful to even play a tiny little role in it.
Yeah, I really feel that too. I'm actually working with Nicole on a project right now. We're doing a little research project together and forging a connection there. And I'm very hopeful. Like, I'm probably more hopeful now than I ever have been. I was never involved in politics in my entire life. Like, I was like so over it. I didn't think it mattered. I thought it was completely broken. But I finally see like a sliver of like a window of actual change being made with Bobby and Nicole forging this alliance with Trump. And like, I hate that I'm voting for Trump or whatever. I'm just going to say it. But like, I actually do see that he may have changed a bit. And I trust Bobby. I met him personally. I've talked for hours with Nicole as well. And I trust their judgment on this.
Mm-hmm.
And I do see immense potential here. I'm also really encouraged by the fact that Bobby is in direct connection with Jack, that Jack gave him his entire constitutional amendment for El Salvador on decentralized medicine and healthcare, that's in the hands of Bobby, and that Bobby is potentially going to be, at a top seat in the CDC or the FDA. Like, this is going to be big time. Like, we have the potential to really make some huge moves here. And it's really exciting to even think about playing a part in that. So I'm very honored to be in a position to support people in any aspect. But I think at the large scale, like, we can make some big moves. I had a talk with Dr. Martin Moore-Eid on my podcast, and he was telling me about, he's the one who discovered the SCN in the human brain, about how he's been battling with the lighting industry for decades about how toxic it is, and that it's falling on deaf ears essentially. But I think if we get the right people in the right positions, we can really start to make some changes, like not banning incandescent bulbs in 2028, for example. That we can make better technology, like Daylight Computers doing the first like blue light free tablet. We can still use tech. I think we can have our cake and eat it too, but we just need to be really honest about where we are right now, the negative impact of the non-AVMFs and the artificial blue light and all of this technology on our bodies, so that we can make better tech. I think ultimately we are very creative, curious beings, and when tasked with a challenge, we rise to the occasion. But if we're just in denial that there's a problem to begin with, we can't even begin to have that conversation and that think tank to make positive change. And so that's something that I'm really passionate about, because sometimes I'll get pushback from people like, oh, should we just like never use tech and like go back to being cavemen? And like, no, that's not the point. We can only move forward. We're not going to de-evolve. But I think as a part of our evolution, we need to get really clear about what inputs are required for the health of the physical body in an era where it's like people are moving towards like augmented reality and AI, this and that. Well, it's like, okay, you can enjoy that technology maybe, but at the same time, if it's at the cost of your body, if you can take a pill for that, maybe people will just do it. But I think ultimately we're in this waking up period, especially since COVID, where people's trust is eroding in these centralized institutions of health, and for good reason. And people are waking up to the severe issues that we're facing health wise. People are also experiencing more health issues themselves, which is an ultimate wake up call. I think that is the function of disease. It's like to wake you up to some aspect of your environment that isn't working. And the longer that we sit here looking at disease as just something that needs to be gotten rid of with a quick fix, as an inconvenience to our busy lifestyles, we're completely missing the spiritual point of discomfort and disease. And so in essence, big pharma is essentially robbing us of the opportunity to evolve spiritually. And if you think about it like that, then it really becomes like, wow, this is actually a spiritual war as well as like a war on health and everything else. And so anyway, it all comes back to just the individual making better decisions for themselves, making small changes, building momentum to build a life that they think is worth living.
Amen. You know, it's we'll pull this back into going through the health pyramid and giving some people some information that they can begin to apply right now. But I'm so with you, and it's interesting the element that big pharma plays in leading people down this path of thinking there's a pill for it. I'm just so far from that end of the spectrum that since my diagnosis was discovered simply because we found a little bit of blood in my urine, no pain, no issues, but I felt like, hey, I guess I should get that looked at. And since then, I would say there was only one day that I didn't feel well. And I mean, I feel really good as a 43-year-old man. I tell people all the time, I feel like I'm in my 20s still. And a lot of that is because I don't train like I used to in my 20s. I recognize that I'm 43. So I train and I rest and recover knowing I'm 43. And as such, I feel so much younger. But there was one evening that I felt some pain in my back, and I ended up vomiting all night. I was from 8 p.m. to 3:30 a.m. the next day. I I didn't feel good, you know, and I decided I have to feel this. There's a reason that I'm feeling this. I need to experience this. I don't want to block this. I didn't take even Tylenol or Advil. I didn't know if some sort of pill I was going to take would make it worse anyway. But I told myself as I felt it that there was a lesson in this. There's something for me to learn. And I think you're right. The spiritual side of it, like I've been on a spiritual journey for years now. And I think if it didn't start beforehand, it certainly was highlighted the most with the peak of COVID, because as a massage therapist, I was told I couldn't work. And if I chose to, I was at risk of a $10,000 fine and losing my license and all these different things. I said, well, that's not an option. I have a family I need to raise. But I said, all right, for however long this is going to be, let me start to take care of myself. So I got meditating every day. I started journaling every day. And that was really this spiritual realm for me, and it's been life changing to the point that I don't think before that, if I was in the pain I was in that evening, that I wouldn't have taken even Tylenol or Advil. But there was a lesson to be learned, as I said. And I think back that the day and a half prior to that, I had a little more sugar than I'm used to having. I was physically exerting myself in ways that I hadn't in a while. We were jumping off the diving board into the pool for 2 days in a row and doing some gymnastic stuff with my friend's son out in the yard, just having a great time. I don't regret any of it, but putting my body through that, I was able to look back and reflect and say, well, yeah, what I just did to myself in that short period of time is absolutely what resulted in this. And I won't be doing that again, you know, at least in that fashion. So I could talk about that for a while too, but I do think the premise of what we're talking about here and giving people the information they need to empower themselves, to stop with the instant thought of what pill can I take? I mean, let's be honest, we're one of two countries that big pharma can have commercials direct to consumer, and even New Zealand has a lot of regulations with it. We've got none. You know, it's because we've got the money, let's go right to the customer and say, go talk to your doctor about this. Well, I know it's I'm not going to be a top on the list of the people in charge by sharing this type of information, but man, I think we can make a difference if we get people to recognize that the human body is capable of healing itself. If we get rid of the toxins, if we take back control of the epigenetics of our lifestyle factors. So I guess with that, maybe we can bring it back with your health pyramid. We've got the light and dark. And as you said, this stuff is free. Let's get out into nature. Let's let the sun do its job. Let's touch the ground. You know, that grounding element is going to play a role with the magnetism part. The sun is going to play the role with both the light and the water part, letting the mitochondria make the exclusion zone water. And all of those are going to take care of the next level, which is the sleep. If the foundational level is where it needs to be, we sleep incredibly well. So now we feel better. Now we're going to make better choices when it comes to the next level, which is the nutrition. And I think maybe we can get to the nutrition element because, you know, even in the nutrition world, what I feel happens is you've got all the dogma. And I like to share with my clients this idea of you have to meet them where they are. If I'm to help you, I have to meet you where you are. If I'm going to give you direction somewhere, I have to know where you're starting from. So if I'm coming at this as I'm just blanketly saying the best thing out there is whether I'm on the realm of vegan or carnivore or paleo or animal based with Dr. Saladino or wherever it happens to fall, they're all missing something. And I think that if we consider this idea of eating locally and seasonally, I think there's a case to be made that almost all of them, throw keto in there as well. They all have their place, but not 24/7 and not for everybody based on where you live. So I guess with me kind of painting that overview, I'll pass it over to you and we'll get your take on it all.
Yeah, so first of all, maybe we can just frame the difference between even just a century ago compared to now. So, with our global food supply chain, we have access to essentially any food we want at all times of year. Like, you could be in Boston in December and you could go get mangoes at Whole Foods. But Jack often phrases this as like, okay, you can, but should you do that? Well, when we learn about the role that nutrition and food plays in our quantum biology and our mitochondrial biology, we can start to disentangle, like, okay, maybe that's not the best choice for me. And a lot of this actually comes back to the deuterium story too, which I alluded to earlier. Deuterium is a form of hydrogen. Protium is the most abundant form of hydrogen. It has one proton and one electron. Deuterium is a heavier form of hydrogen that has one proton, one electron, and one neutron. And the presence of that neutron makes the atom bigger. So this is a little bit technical, but in my ebook, I showed this. Essentially, the way that the electron transport chain in mitochondria works is that electrons will enter into this chain. While they enter, protons get pumped from the inner matrix, the inside of the mitochondria, into the intermembrane space, which is like the space between the inner and the outer membrane. When those protons get pumped, essentially what's happening is you're separating negative from positive charge. That is physically creating an actual battery in the same way that like a battery works, so the negative and positive pole in your remote control. And then the way that that battery actually works to make ATP is by pumping those protons from that inner membrane space back into the inner matrix through something called the ATP synthase enzyme, which is a literal motor, like a rotor that turns, and when it spins, ATP gets made from ADP. ATP being that cellular energy currency that we talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. So as the protons dissipate from that inner membrane space back into the inner matrix, they move through the center of this ATP synthase. Now, protons in the form of protium are small. They fit very well. Deuterium, as it's bigger, doesn't fit so well. So deuterium, as Jack would say, like, mitochondria are very racist against deuterium because deuterium basically breaks these motors. It breaks the energy production capacity. It makes the battery not work right. So if you look at the mitochondrial compartment, deuterium levels are extremely low. Compare that to like your blood levels. Deuterium levels are quite high, the highest in the body within the blood. This should also make sense now why I said earlier red blood cells are the only ones without mitochondria, because they're in this very deuterium-rich environment that actually you can't really square those together, let's say. You would have issues with your mitochondrial function in the red blood cells if they had mitochondria. And so that's, not an issue because evolutionarily those were removed selectively from those types of cells. But if we look at the mitochondria and we look at deuterium levels and what's contributing to deuterium, we have our food and we have our drinking water. We also have other inputs that allow our bodies to selectively deplete deuterium, for example, sweating. So if you're outside in the summer and you're sweating, that water that's wicking away off your skin is coming from your bloodstream. Your bloodstream is enriched in deuterium, and so that sweat is enriched in deuterium. And when you deplete that deuterium from the blood, now water gets pulled out of the cells, which is deuterium depleted, because I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but the water made within mitochondria is deuterium depleted metabolic water. Again, this should make sense now because there's very low deuterium in mitochondria. So the hydrogen that's available to make the water from oxygen is protium. It's already in the right form. So this deuterium depleted water can be pulled out to reestablish equilibrium within the bloodstream to the cells. And in effect, what you're doing is you're pulling deuterium out of the tissues that can then be rehydrated through the mitochondria making more water, or from the water you're drinking to a certain extent as well. So from the food standpoint, the foods that are highest in deuterium are roots and fruits, basically all of our carbs, all of our plant foods, except for the greens, like the green part of the plant, because the chloroplasts that make the plant green are actually similar to mitochondria in that they don't like deuterium. So if you're eating a plant food that's green, That's going to be lower in deuterium, but the lowest deuterium foods are animal fats, and then animal meats would be second. So when we just learned that, one really good way of depleting deuterium is through sweating, but also through UV light exposure and getting that high quality sunlight, in the wintertime, you can imagine that it's harder for the body to deplete deuterium when there's less quality sun and cold temperatures. And so, what is the fix to this? Let's say, what is the way their body deals with this is for eating a more carnivore-ish, keto-ish diet, because actually those are the foods available in the winter if you're, living off of local, you know, food stores, because you can't really grow plant foods in the winter unless you like maybe did some ferments, for example, but maybe some root vegetables as well, but pretty minimal. Primarily, the diet in the wintertime is going to be animal-based foods. And that's a perfect match for the way your mitochondria need to function during the wintertime, because they need actually more fats in order to make metabolic heat, in order to keep your body temperature stable. So there's a synergy there. There's also the synergy of the low deuterium in the animal-based foods that then allow your mitochondria to be able to maintain that low deuterium environment. Contrast that with the summertime when there's an abundance of plant foods growing. Now you can eat those plant foods, those carbohydrate-rich foods, but you can deal with that excess deuterium because you're sweating more, because you're getting higher quality sunlight that's allowing your body to selectively deplete that deuterium. And so when it comes to diet, it's really quite simple. And it's also good from an environmental standpoint, too, because you're not supporting produce being flown from halfway around the world to get to your plate. I always laugh when like people are trying to blame cows on like global warming and climate change when we're literally flying produce all the way around the world to get to people's plates. Like, how much is that contributing to gas emissions or whatever? But anyways, if you're eating a local seasonal diet, you're supporting local farms, you're supporting your local economy, you're also supporting your mitochondria, because you're just going to eat whatever foods are available in that season. And that's likely going to look like, if you're at a more northern latitude, a more carnivore-ish, keto-ish diet in the winter, and adding in lots of healthy plant foods that are growing seasonally and locally in your environment in the spring through the fall. And so it's really actually quite simple. I mean, if you can shop at farmers markets, that's great. Or you can even look up lists of foods that are, seasonal to your area at a given time. I think there's an app for this, actually. I don't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but it could be the simplest thing is really to shop at like a farmer's market if you can, because then whatever's available is, from there. Cultivate relationships with local farmers. I think that's also really great to be able to support them, especially if they're conducting regenerative practices that are healing the topsoil and adding carbon back in. We only have like 50 growing cycles left in our cash crops, like all of our monocrops, and it's literally draining all of the life force from the soil that actually gives nutrients to food. It's not a sustainable practice, and we kind of all know that, but we're ignoring the elephant in the room because we're really just focused on the next like quarter, the next fiscal year. We're not focused on the long-term sustainability and health of our bodies or the planet. And so there's a lot of fractals here too. Like the way we treat nature and the planet is the way we're treating our bodies, and it's like everything is related. It's all the same. So the more we can get back to, even growing your own food, that's great. It's a great way to get outside and get your hands, into the earth, and you're grounding and you're getting sunlight all at the same time. And you're also putting your life force energy into the food that you're growing. It's going to be more nutritious. You're literally infusing your attention and awareness into it, your consciousness into it. And so if you can grow some of your own food, that's great. It doesn't have to be a ton, but I think you can do a lot with a pretty small area. One of my good friends is like into agroforestry, and he's just working with a little backyard, and he has so many different types of plants and things growing, and you can get some chickens and whatever you've got. But if you live in a city or you can't grow your own stuff, then you just look for the local farms, look for the markets that you can buy some local stuff. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Obviously we like some treats once in a while, but like that 80-20 Pareto principle that Jack talks about, if 80% of the time you're doing the right thing, you're seeing the sunrise, you're getting your midday sun, you're getting your bare feet on the earth, you're eating local seasonal foods, that's going to give you the biggest benefit, essentially. And of course there's always room for wiggle room. Like we like to have our simple pleasures or whatever, but most of the time we should be doing things in a way that's conducive to our health, the health of the planet, and it's going to pay back in dividends ultimately.
Absolutely right. I love that you touched upon regenerative agriculture too. We're really fortunate in my area that I know of. There's three, and I've heard of some more too. So I make it a point to get to them. I have a chest freezer, so I'll get either a pig or a cow at a time and put it right in there, and my family will work right through it. And knowing that we're supporting local, It's cutting down on the cost of moving it throughout the country or world, depending on where things are coming from. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And there's what I discovered for myself is the more I worked on that, and I back in January I decided to kind of experiment, and I just went through the month and did carnivore, and I felt incredible the entire month. And I realized it well before too, because I've worked in some degree of intermittent fasting for quite some time now as well. But this idea that we need to do the conventional agriculture as we are, which, as you alluded to, has destroyed the earth. I mean, it's no longer soil; it's now dirt that they need to add all these things to because there's no soil there to grow it. There's monocrop versus having multiple crops that help one another, and there's some synergy going on there. But when we get to a point that we're actually eating what our body needs, we're eating so much less. People talk about how expensive it is to eat healthy, but if you're eating right for your body, it's really not that expensive. I mean, I know some families that will go to fast food, and for the family, it's outrageous how expensive it can get to because it's not nourishing, it's not filling. You're hungry a little while later. Whereas if you can buy some local regeneratively raised meats or some pasture raised eggs, your body is nourished. You're full after a single meal that actually gives your body what it needs to thrive. And that's what we miss out on. And then, you bring up a good point that the average person does say, but I want to indulge on at least on occasion. And, you kind of touched upon it too before with technology, that people's attitudes, I don't even think they realize what they're saying. I think it touches upon some of what Dr. Bruce Lipton talks about, our subconscious programming. They're
Yep.
just wired. They're not even thinking consciously. They just react. So what you're telling me is I can never use technology? Well, no, that's asinine. Of course we're going to use it, but let's find ways to use it properly and so that it doesn't harm our physiology. And similarly with eating, sure, you can indulge on occasion, but if you're already unhealthy and you're fighting to be able to indulge, then your priorities are a little out of whack. And I'd argue that big food already has you. You're already addicted to things. So if we can take 30 to 45 days and break the addiction to these things and allow the body to heal and then start over and fuel the body the way that it needs, I mean, it's an absolute game changer when we eat nourishing food, local, seasonal, support the local farms, as you said, and farmers markets. I truly believe that's the answer. And how quickly we could turn it around of the 50 harvests that we have left, if that all turns to regenerative tomorrow, yes, it takes a little while to build back that topsoil, but that 50 will double and beyond in a pretty short amount of time if they all do it. Gabe Brown talks about that. There's so many regenerative guys out there that are sharing their story, and the information is just incredible. So similarly, we can do it with our body and the gut microbiome. I know you delve into that. You've got your gut protocol, making sure that people are learning truly how to heal, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, the soils are directly connected to our gut. I mean, we are a part of nature. The fact that we have awareness doesn't mean we're separate from it just because we're living in this, like, polarized world. I mean, consciousness requires polarity in order to actually perceive the other. So, like, we have to live in this polarity, but we also need to recognize our relationship to everything. Like, we couldn't be here without the sun, the moon, every planet, the entire universe conspiring to allow us to have this experience. And so to think that we're just completely separate from nature, from reality, and that we're just in our own worlds is completely, just, it's not true if you just look at the connections. So it makes no surprise that, with our soils being depleted and the microbial life within the soil being completely demolished, that our guts are going through the same thing. Because on another hand as well, we didn't talk about biophotons, but the mitochondria make their own light. They're both electromagnetic antennas and emitters, so they can detect the electromagnetic environment, which is a major problem with the non-native EMFs. They also emit their own light in the form of UV and infrared biophotons. That's also why you can look at somebody on an infrared camera. You can see them. They're warm. You feel warm. That heat is infrared light. By the same token, the food that we eat also has biophotons. So the more recently it was harvested or killed, the more vitality is in the food. And so if you're ordering or buying something that was completely processed and stripped of its life, it no longer has that vitality. But even if you're buying like conventional produce that was flown halfway across the world and sitting on a shelf for God knows how long, it also is missing its vitality because the longer it sits detached from the earth, the more that gets depleted. So there's not less nutrients, there's less photons, there's less nourishment that's coming from eating that food. And so, like you said, when you eat fresher foods that are local seasonal, you're going to feel more satisfied and you're going to be more nourished from a smaller volume of food. This also, of course, plays in with the whole POMC story too, because if you're getting your sun right, you're also getting more appetite suppression and metabolic rate augmentation just from getting that UVB light. And so you're going to be less hungry to eat that food. And that's because, you know, why we can ask the question, why would our bodies inhibit appetite in response to UVB light from midday sun? It's because you're literally eating the sun by just getting your skin outside, your melanin out in that sunlight. You're getting free energy from that process. And so the more we can rely on all three inputs, getting that skin in the sun, getting our bare feet on the ground, and the proper nourishment from a, like, let's say a local seasonal diet, then we're going to rely way less on calories and nutrients from food than we otherwise would have if we're indoors all the time. You can also think about it like this. Our bodies are interpreting low UV light environments as wintertime because that's when you would encounter low UV light in the winter. However, people are sitting indoors around like 70 degrees or whatever. So they're getting no UV light, which the body's like, okay, it's winter, but it's like 70 something degrees. And there's no infrared light, which is just a complete curveball because we would never encounter that in nature. Nature always has consistent red and infrared light throughout the year, no matter what latitude you're at. Obviously, if you're at the North Pole in the wintertime, it's an exception because it's dark all day. But for all the habitable places, you're receiving some red and infrared light whenever the sun is out. So we have this conundrum in the indoor environment where it's low UV light, but it's warm temperatures. And because it's low UV light, we're actually inclined to eat way more food because we're not getting that appetite suppression. We're not getting that free energy production from the sunlight striking our skin. And now we need more food to just get by. And that also tracks with, like, in the wintertime when UV light levels are lower, you're going to want to eat more food, ideally from fats and proteins, because those fats are going to give you more nutrient density. Again, they're also going to help support mitochondrial heat production and also brown fat activation, which helps to keep you warm in the face of cold. So everything synergizes together. There's nothing mistake here. Like, everything is in harmony if you're living, at least in part, in accordance with the natural inputs you would receive if you were living outdoors. So doing some intentional cold exposure, honestly, any time of year is going to be good, because even in the summertime, you could be in El Salvador and the Pacific Ocean's still pretty cold. So you can encounter cold bodies of water essentially anywhere at any time. And that helps to buffer your body in the wintertime because now you have the capacity to maintain your body heat better, to clear excess nutrients as well, because that brown fat that gets stimulated by the cold helps to take up excess glucose and fat from the circulation. So it's really important from a metabolic standpoint, from a body temperature maintenance standpoint as well. And so we're kind of really missing that as a society. People have, like, made you bundle up from the time you're a kid when you go outside. Even if you wanted to go out with just like shorts and a t-shirt on, your parents or your grandparents may have forced you to bundle up because of whatever programming they received. But other cultures, not like that. In Russia, they'll put the babies out in the cold because they know it's really good for them to receive that input, and that allows you to actually maintain your brown fat over time. If we look at babies, they're born with about 35% of their fat as brown fat. That will completely be decimated over the course of their lifetime into adulthood if they're not receiving that cold exposure input. So I think it's something like 20% of adults are walking around without any detectable brown fat, which is pretty wild because of its importance in the metabolic health system, its importance as an endocrine organ. So there's a thyroid brown fat axis that actually allows that brown fat to take up inactive thyroid hormone T4 and spit out T3. So we know that exists, and yet in people in hypothyroidism who are cold averse, their doctors will encourage them to bundle up and avoid the cold because it's uncomfortable. But that discomfort is actually a pathway into resolving the issue that's at hand at a fundamental level. So embracing temperatures, embracing the warmth and getting sweaty and depleting that deuterium, embracing the cold and allowing the body to make more of that internal light, because cold is very potently stimulating mitochondria to make heat, but also more light as well. So in the absence of UV light from the sun in the wintertime, we're meant to get cold because that allows our mitochondria to make their own UV biophotons, their own UV light. And this again just goes back to the fact that UV and infrared light are the most important light frequencies from a human bioenergetic and biological standpoint. If we're not getting that much from the sun because it's wintertime, we're going to make it ourselves, assuming that we're getting cold. But we, with our like, kind of aversion from discomfort and avoidance of cold, we're no longer engaging those pathways in the winter, and that's creating some issues over time. So it's really, again, all roads kind of come back to just immersing yourself in nature more. Being exposed to temperature extremes doesn't mean you have to do it all day, but just intentionally doing it for a portion of the day, whether it's doing a cold plunge or just getting outside in the cold air. I will say that cold water immersion is much more efficient than cold air just because of the specific heat capacity of water. It's able to wick heat away very easily from the body, which engages those adaptations more quickly. And intentionally doing that, you can really help to support thyroid hormone metabolism and conversion. You're going to make more metabolic light, which supports your internal melanin sheets within the brain and within other parts of the body as well. And you're supporting your clearance of sugar and fat from the circulation. It's also a really potent mood booster. So the thing that people chase when they're taking Adderall is dopamine and norepinephrine. Cold increases dopamine and norepinephrine way more than Adderall does, and any of the stimulants that people gravitate towards. So there's an immense mental health component to that, physical health, metabolic, and mitochondrial function. It's just a matter of recognizing that these inputs are important and then consciously engaging and engineering them back into the lifestyle.
Amazing. You're like a walking encyclopedia. This is just wild how much you've got, and I'm so grateful. So it's interesting too. I have this kind of line that I've lived by for a while: to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And, within reason, of course. It's not getting uncomfortable just to do it, but things that I've learned, okay, it makes sense to do this, to be uncomfortable doing this for a certain period of time, knowing that there will be some sort of return on investment there. It's going to have a beneficial response. So with that in mind, I like this premise. I wrote down some notes earlier. I want to try to give people something to take away from today, in this idea of what's ideal versus maybe what's acceptable. And starting from a perspective of what I've learned to do, instead of telling people what they should do, I like to share my story. And it's a way of getting them to drop their guard and not feel judged. And if what I do is extreme for you, then don't start where I'm starting. But these are things that I've changed over the years, and they've really served me quite well. So if we take it within the health pyramid, the light and dark dynamic, and I'll add a quick caveat to this too that I learned recently: the darkness and the role it plays with melatonin, there's actually a tumor suppressing element to that. So I've really started to leverage the darkness even more than I had been, that when that sun sets, I'm trying to keep lights off. I've bought some different amber lights for the house, and just trying to get the family to understand why I'm doing these things. So some changes like that. Wearing my blue light blocking glasses before sunrise, after sunset, getting some sun in my eyes, on my skin. No, not staring directly at the sun, but looking in that direction. Some midday sunset, all of those things that I'm exposing myself to. My sleep has really become a bit of a priority, that I'm in bed as early as my family's schedule will allow it to be. I'm not just going to leave the family and go to bed, but trying to get them to do the same thing. And you mentioned the cold exposure, some cold thermogenesis. I started a few years back now. I actually leverage more sauna in the summer to make it even hotter than what I'm going to experience day to day. Instead of seeking comfort, I step outside of the comfort. I get hotter than it's going to be. And then in the winter, the fall and winter, I leverage more of my cold plunge. I've got a tub on the deck here that I try to get even colder than the cold is going to be, to give my body that, expansion, if you will, beyond what we're exposed to, instead of trying to come tighter into that 68 to 72 degrees that most people seek. I'm recognizing that, okay, when it's a hot day, if I expose myself to the sauna first, it doesn't feel as hot. On a cold day, if I get in that tub and I've literally got to break through the ice layer with a sledgehammer to get into that thing, your body can really tolerate an awful lot when you push outside of your comfort zone. So these types of things. And then with the nutrition, as we alluded to, I found some local farms that I really speak highly of. I'll put the links in the show note. I talk about them frequently. So anybody who's already following along, they've probably heard about them multiple times, but I can't promote them enough. And then if I get to the tip of the pyramid, the movement, I would say I exercise 7 days a week, but it isn't that I need to be in the gym. I'm doing strength training in some capacity. I'd average 3 to 5 days a week. There are some weeks that it's seven days a week that I'm doing. Um, but it isn't about I have to be inside. In fact, listening to Jack, I really like the idea of let me get my workout in outside. Let me leverage nature while I'm getting my workout in and getting that much more. So it's really like you alluded to that bioharmonizing and just finding different things that if again to anybody listening, as I explained all of that, there's so much that I'm doing. I get it, but don't feel like you have to start with all of it. Kind of make a note of what your average day looks like and where you can make some changes and start with 1 to 3 things and change a few things. But Alexis, with what I just laid out there, are there some changes that you'd recommend that I still make too, or are we looking pretty good there? What would your take be? And then what would we tell to the listeners?
So, I mean, one thing that I would say for the listeners just briefly is I really recommend starting with light first because it will lower the resistance to making subsequent changes. If you're experiencing resistance, it's largely because, your nervous system has rigidified in some way that you're resisting change. You're resisting neurogenesis and new neurons making connections. That's literally what creating a new habit is. And we need to get you more parasympathetic, and we can do that by mitigating blue light exposure. So, using software like Iris on your computer, using endogenous filters on your Apple devices. I have a pinned reel on my profile that shows you how to do that. Just starting with that, starting to get just even 5 to 10 minutes of natural light in your eyes first thing in the morning, ideally at sunrise, but whenever you get up, just start with that. Trying to get at least 10 minutes of midday sun, even if it's just on your lunch break outside. Just make sure that your eyes are not staring at the sun, but just getting that full natural light, like not wearing sunglasses. Take off your glasses and pop out your contacts if you can, or you can wear contacts like Daly's Total One, which doesn't have added UV blocking, so that would be another option. And then at starting around sundown, religiously blocking blue light. I would just start with those 3 things at those 3 times of day. And over the course of even just a couple days, you'll start to see changes that will help build the momentum and the neuroplasticity needed to make subsequent changes. So that's what I would say there. With regards to cold, I will say that women, if we do too much cold too frequently and too cold, that it can kind of screw up the cycle a little bit. I track my hormones almost every day. And so as I've started my cold plunge journey with my Morosco, I've been tracking and, just seeing what happens. And I noticed some fluctuations when I was doing it every day. So now what I do is at 50 to 55 degrees. So my tub is around 55 degrees. And this is the range that Jack also recommends for the metabolic benefits. A lot of this actually comes from, if we think about physics labs, when they're studying semiconductors, they study them at cold temperatures because it actually helps them work better. And if we look at the work of Robert O. Becker, as influenced by Albert St. George's talk that he gave to him when he was a graduating medical student, St. George said that it seems like all of the genes in the biology of humans are encoding semiconductors. The proteins are semiconductors. And so Becker went on to prove that. And the point being is that our body is full of semiconductors that work better at cold temperatures. So that's why there can be a major benefit to lowering your body temperature using cold water immersion, for example. But the way to get the biggest benefit from that would be 1 or 2 times a week, you get into 50 to 55 degree water for like 20 to 45 minutes. So this is a long session. You can't stay in that long if it's too cold. So as Tom Seeger would say, for the psychological benefits, getting into like ice water is great. And that would only be for like 90 seconds to like 3 minutes tops, something like that. But if you're looking for more of the semiconductor benefits, then getting a slightly warmer temperature between 50 and 55 degrees and staying in there for a longer period of time is kind of where the money is with regards to improving the efficiency and the conductivity of the semiconductor network. So that's what I would say about that. So what I personally do is I'll do 1 or 2 sessions a week between 30 and 45 minutes. And then I'll do 2 or 3 additional sessions like between 5 and 10 minutes. And with that schedule for me, I've seen that my cycle is stabilized. For men, you guys can tolerate way more. And actually, if you do cold and then you exercise after, it helps to increase testosterone levels. For women, we can actually get a testosterone boost just from doing the cold without even exercising after. But it is important to let your body warm up naturally afterwards. So you wouldn't want to go from cold into a sauna, for example. If you want to do contrast therapy, you want to start with sauna and end on cold. That allows your body to warm itself back up naturally, which gives you more of those metabolic benefits. And with regards to figuring out like the timing and the duration and the frequency for yourself, it requires some level of experimentation, especially for women. I recommend tracking your hormones using natural cycles and this device called Inito, INITO, which allows you to track your estrogen, progesterone, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone every day. It's also used for cycle tracking, which is what I use it for, but also just for keeping tabs on things. That allows you to see, if you're doing it too much or it's too cold or whatever, then you can kind of begin to modulate that system and that schedule for yourself. But at a baseline level, I would say one longer session per week between 50 and 55 degrees, and then maybe 2 to 3 moderately long sessions for the general person. But there's going to be exceptions too. Like if you're actively dealing with health issues, maybe you need more, maybe you need less. If you're a man, you could probably tolerate more, maybe incorporate some colder sessions per week as well if you want more of the psychological resiliency benefits. So that's what I would say overall on cold. Everything else you're doing sounds great, but you may want to incorporate some long sessions at some warmer temperatures to get also a different subset of benefits.
Excellent. That's incredible. Let's see. I think you hit everything and everything I possibly thought of and then some.
There's one other thing I'll mention, actually. Yeah. Maybe two. So with regards to exercising outside, there's an incredible synergy that happens when you do that. So we talked earlier about grounding. If your bare feet are on the earth, you're getting free energy from the earth. We already talked about, of course, also getting free energy from melanin interacting with water in your skin via sunlight. So if you think about exercise, you're demanding a tremendous amount of energy from your working muscles to perform different activities. So there's an incredible synergy when you're having your bare skin in the sun and your bare feet on the ground while you're exercising, because now your body has access to way more free energy to perform the movements. So not only will you potentially be able to work at a higher work capacity, which is what I've noticed for myself, but also your recovery will be better too. And your performance will also be enhanced by the red and infrared light content of the sun, which directly stimulates mitochondria throughout the body, including in the working muscles. So you may be able to get some more reps in. We also didn't talk about UVA light, but UVA light is a primary stimulus for nitric oxide production. Nitric oxide being this stimulator of vasodilation and nutrient oxygen delivery to tissues, waste removal from tissues. A lot of people, like gym bros, will take nitric oxide boosters to help them get a better pump in, not realizing that the best nitric oxide booster is UVA light from midday sun. The only catch to that is you'll get a dose-dependent increase in nitric oxide production depending on how much skin you have exposed. So the more skin you can expose, the better. Kaniki and Cool Tan, they make like tan-through bathing suits and like shorts. So if you don't have a space to work out naked in your yard, for example, you can wear like the Cool Tan swim shorts, so you get some light through that as well. There's also, I would argue, hormonal benefits and other benefits as well to getting UVA light across your entire body. So for example, nitric oxide deficiency is a primary defect in erectile dysfunction, and a lot of men will lean on Viagra or Cialis, for example, not realizing you can get the same benefit from local UV light exposure on your fun parts. So just a pro tip there. And we get all these benefits at the same time when we're working out outside, as long as we're leveraging, let's say, that afternoon sunlight, maybe working out between noon and 4 p.m., depending on the season, out in your yard, ideally with your bare feet on the earth. And you can also ground through concrete, which is what I'll mention too. The things you can't ground through are any sort of synthetic material, any sort of petrochemically based materials, things like that. They aren't going to facilitate the grounding force. But pavement, concrete, grass, dirt, stone, sand are all great. The beach is actually probably the best place you can go for grounding, because it's like wet sand, or if you're walking in the water, the salt water also facilitates conductivity, so you get more of those free ions. And that's actually another reason why I really love my Morosco forge, because that entire unit is grounded. The tub itself is metal, and it's connected to the ground that goes into the outlet that's connected to the earth. And so the whole tub is fully grounded, similar to the ocean. And then I also added like 10 pounds of Epsom salts or magnesium sulfate, which further facilitates that grounding force. So when I get in there, I'm getting the benefits of transdermal magnesium to help relax the body, but I'm also getting the benefits of grounding and that free energy from that in a combination with the effects of cold directly. So it's really like this magical experience. And right now, where I have my tub place, I get full sun on it for a good chunk of time during the day. So when I'm in there, I'm usually getting full sun with this full grounding force and the cold, and it's literally like better than any drug that you can imagine. It's like just the best remedy for mental health, for focus, for energy levels, and for like so many other aspects of your body. And I think it's really just a sign that your body's like, yes, we want this, more of this, like this is good for you. And so when you start weeding out the negative inputs into your biology and start giving it more of the positive inputs, you're going to get that feedback that it's like, yes, we want this, this is good for us, and you can lean into that and you can trust your intuition around that. The problem is when we are on all of our artificial tech and our artificial foods, artificial lifestyles, it hijacks our dopamine system, so we can no longer trust our urges, because now our urges are being hijacked by this technology that was designed to make us addicted to it. And so that's why starting with the light and just becoming more autonomous through removing junk light and adding back in natural light allows us to see more clearly in every aspect of life, allows us to make better decisions, and allows us to get better access to our intuitions to actually guide us through decision making in life that doesn't require the mind.
Incredible. I love knowing that about the Morosco. I didn't realize that you're actually grounding while you're in there.
Yep.
And funny, I do put Epsom salt in my tub as well, but I've got a 100-gallon Rubbermaid tub that I fill from the hose, and then just as the season gets colder, it dictates the temperature. I don't have a control on it, but that's really good to know. And it makes me think about there's so many people that want to look into leveraging what other thing can I go pay to do, whether it's red light therapy or some degree of cold thermogenesis in a place or a sensory deprivation float, all these different things, infrared saunas. I love your idea of, again, we're lowering the barrier of entry. Let's start with what's free. Let's get into nature. Let's do it in your backyard. But for the people, whether it's city living, whatever it might be, their schedule, they tell themselves that there's no changing my schedule. It is what it is. I cannot get the sun, these different types of things. If they're going to be leveraging these other things, is there an ideal time to be doing it? Is there, what would your recommendation be of those types of things, of infrared sauna, red light therapy, that type of stuff?
So Jack would tell them to invest their money in term life insurance. I mean, at some level, you have to want it for yourself, right? So, like, I can tell you all the things in the world, but if, some people just won't be on board and maybe this isn't for them, and maybe they need more suffering in their life to wake them up to get to a point where they're willing to make the change. Some people are just kind of disillusioned and they're used to just being in their kind of illusion of reality and they just are happy with it. And I mean, I'm no one to tell them that they can't do that. I'm all for, personal decision making and autonomy, but I would just argue that if you're addicted to tech, you're not actually autonomous. You just may think you are. And let's face it, most people are addicted to their technology in some way, shape, or form. And so I think, the more we can just think about first principles. So if you're working on you want to use a red light panel, when would you encounter red and infrared light in nature? Well, it's going to be anytime the sun's out, actually, from sunrise to sundown. So it's kind of free game there. With regards to cold, we talked about earlier that cold induces a lot of light production by your mitochondria. So light, we want to kind of allocate that to the daytime because, like we said, at night, darkness is really important. So we don't necessarily want to get cold at nighttime. We want to reallocate that to the daytime. With regards to things like grounding sheets and things like this, I'm okay with it. I would personally, though, recommend that if you can plug it, like your pads or your sheets, directly into the earth, that's going to be a better idea. And you can do that by essentially buying some copper wire. You would coil it around the outlet plug that you would use for your grounding pad or whatever, and then run that wire out a window or a door, and then bury a little hole in the ground somewhere, and then put the little coil of wire in there, maybe with a little bit of water, and pat it down. That will allow you to directly connect to the earth. The problem with connecting to outlets is there could be dirty electricity, there could be jump conduction, and even if you use a voltmeter to measure it and it says grounded, maybe it's not grounded when the dishwasher's running or the dryer or the washing machine's running. And so there can be times when jump conduction happens that you wouldn't necessarily catch if you're just doing a one-off reading on your voltmeter. So to get around that, plugging in directly to the earth via copper wire, or if you have a long enough cord on the thing, you could do it directly as well, will ensure that you're actually getting a grounding force from that sheet or pad, versus thinking you're doing something good, but actually you could be doing harm if you're not measuring it right and if your wiring isn't the best in that home. Let's see, any other hacks? Well, people will talk about sad lights and stuff. I'm not a huge fan, mostly because they're not really full spectrum. A light that I do really like, though, is the Chroma Sky Portal, which has an adjustable knob for brightness and redness, so you can kind of change the light tone and brightness depending on what time of day it is, which I think is pretty cool. And it does have a decent amount of infrared light as well. If you put your hands up to it, it feels pretty warm. So it is a full spectrum light. It does get quite bright as well. There's another problem with the modern indoor environment, is that we're not exposed to enough bright light during the day. midday sun, or like around this time, it could be up to 300,000 lux. Indoor, you're lucky if you're getting up to 1,000 lux. And so we really need to get both that bright light from the sun during the day and darkness at night to create circadian health, which of course has all the knock-on effects that we discussed. So anytime you can just get a break to get natural light in your eyes and on your skin if possible is going to be a win, even if it's only for like 2 minutes, or just any amount of time is better than nothing. But the more you can create and engineer a life that allows you to have more autonomy in what you do with your schedule, I'm all for that. And I think we're moving into a place like AI could replace a lot of the menial jobs that people aren't really passionate about. That gives people the opportunity to find whatever they're passionate about and go down that route and ultimately be more entrepreneurial. I think entrepreneurship isn't for everybody, but is a large swath of the population that could be an entrepreneur that isn't, because they, whatever, have any barriers and they don't know how to do it or whatever it is. But the start of being able to even get creative enough and find your passion and get connected with that intuition that will help guide you to what is meant for you is getting connected with nature, because we are nature. And so in order to be plugged into that, we actually need to get outside in it and connect with it. And that, can change everything. Like my literal entire life has changed since falling down this quantum health rabbit hole. The people that I hang out with, the conversations I have, the work I'm doing, my personal behaviors and habits, the way that I think, like literally everything has changed. And it's just because I started spending more time outside, really, is the bottom line. And I would just never overstate how much can transform if people just spend the time to prioritize these specific inputs and these environments. And so anybody who thinks they don't have the time, like maybe their health isn't their priority, or maybe their evolution isn't their priority, and that's fine. But at some point, most people will get to a point where they want to do more and be more. And so I would challenge anybody who is approaching that sort of a boundary to transformation to start incorporating some of these things and see where it takes you. The proof of work is there. You'll feel the difference. Just prove it to yourself by trying it for a week and seeing what happens.
Brilliant. That answer was even better than I could have hoped for. And I contemplated, do I even ask the question? Because I've definitely heard Jack talk about it, and I'm with you, and you feel a similar way that, people are looking for ways to, cheat the system essentially, and they're not being honest with themselves, and they're not doing what really matters. So that was a phenomenal answer. I'm 100% with you. And, you just alluded to creativity and maybe people tapping into entrepreneurship. And it reminds me of an Einstein quote: creativity is intellect having fun. And I think there's an element there that maybe somebody is just so programmed, as you alluded to, they're so addicted to tech, they're not as autonomous as they think they are. So if we can challenge ourselves to seek to become as healthy as possible, that's going to help with the gut brain axis. We're going to actually, this thing up here that's essentially just a processor, it's going to process quicker. As Jack talks about, it's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the wisest. And he's certainly leading the way. That dude's brain functions like nobody I know, and although you're pretty impressive, I'll throw that out there too.
No.
The you both have is pretty remarkable. But yeah, if we can challenge people to start with the health first and foremost, heal the gut brain axis, get this processor functioning better, and find times throughout their schedule to put more information in so they don't feel like they have to stay at the job they're at, the career they're at. Find ways to branch out, find ways to look for it. And as I alluded to earlier, it truly felt, as silly as it sounds, like I was like a Neo of sorts, plugging in and downloading this information by changing my schedule, getting up earlier. I no longer use the weekends to run away from the reality I created that I don't like. I use the weekends to create the reality that I want. And again, it's when I say things like that, it's not that I'm patting myself on the back. Like I said, I like to share my story because I think when I share it as my example, anybody that knew a younger version of me would say, holy shit, who is this guy? I'm not the same person I used to be. And I love that, because when we learn, as I alluded to before, Dr. Bruce Lipton and the subconscious programming, we recognize that programming is something that was instilled by other people, and they weren't even aware that they were doing it. So they were downloading programs into our subconscious that were, their negativity, their negative self-talk, and that becomes ours. And then we just feed the loop. So it also goes back to that dynamic of when you heal yourself, you also heal your ancestors and you heal your family after that. I mean, there's something special here that so much of this information we can be pulling from. And again, just start one thing at a time. It doesn't need to be, tomorrow waking up and expecting it all to change, but be honest with yourself, take inventory of where you are and change one thing at a time. And I really do. I love the idea that you're really encouraging people to start with what is free, get out into nature, do it the easiest way. And you don't necessarily need all that other stuff if you just eliminate the toxins and toxic light and so on. So this was incredible.
Amen. Amen. This was really fun. Very fun conversation. Thanks for having me.
It means the world to me. So I'll ask listeners, if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, like, comment, and share. And Dr. Alexis, I know it's on Instagram, Dr. Alexis Jasmine.
Mm-hmm.
Your YouTube is Undoctrinate Yourself,
Mm-hmm.
correct?
I think it's Undoctrinate Yourself Pod. I think so. Or it could be Undoctrinate Yourself on podcast, maybe. If they just search
Okay.
Undoctrinate Yourself, they'll find it.
I love it. And well, I'll make sure to put it in the show notes as well. And if anybody wants to get working with you personally, how would they go about that?
So right now I'm taking people in coursework. So I have a currently live course. I'm going to be doing more group work in the future. I don't have a ton of bandwidth for individual cases, though I will typically make exceptions for that depending on what somebody's got going on. I also am connected with other people that I trust too, depending on what issues people have, so I can potentially make recommendations there. But right now, basically, they could enroll in a live course, one of my previously recorded courses that is also available. They can get my ebook. They can follow on the podcast. And I'm also pretty open in my DMs too. So if anybody has questions and they want to reach out, feel free to DM me on Instagram and I'll get back. I'm also on X at the same handle. Instagram has a lot of censorship issues that I've been battling with. So I also am basically posting redundantly on X, at least for the posts on my wall, but I'm still quite active on Instagram. And hopefully they can, get their shit together, because it's absolutely ridiculous the amount of things that you can't say on that platform. It's very dystopian, but anyways, just trying to work through it and get the message out there.
Amen. Amen. And if you like the shirt, go to, it's still on, link in your bio on the Instagram page, right? Represent, hook her up. Definitely get your hands on that book too, the Lux Living Health Optimization Handbook. You will not regret it. It's a surprisingly easy read with a ton of information. I mean, it was phenomenal. So
I've had sixth graders read it.
Yeah. Amen. And the what better way? Start as young as possible. Get them exposed to it, and they might not understand it just yet, but you're exposing to them a little younger, and then they'll understand it as they go.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Exactly.
Well, thanks again, Alexis. This was incredible, and listeners, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Let's see. Did I?